It's so exciting to see so many people dedicated to free software coming together, learning about and working on free software packages. We're very honored today to have with us the founder, president, and executive director of the Software Freedom Law Center, Eben Moglen. And without further ado.
Thanks, Donald. I hope you feel as happy about the 30th anniversary as I do. I feel like after only 22 years of this that I'm getting a discount on the 30th anniversary, although it may be that if you have been working with Richard for 22 years, you have actually lived through 30. It sometimes feels like that, and so maybe I'm not getting a discount at all. It's certainly true that it's quite a pleasure to see us at 30. And I'm sure there will be lots of opportunities somewhere along the way to get all sentimental and look back at all the wonderful stuff we went through. I did see this as a better chance to talk about where we are next going to go. Having been flogging this thing called Freedom Box along for 5 years with the occasional ghostly help of some people in this room, I recognized that not having a roadmap is a lot of fun, but also a lot of trouble. And I thought maybe rather than a roadmap, I could at least offer some rough terrain notes on where we are going, in the hope that I could spare you a little trouble without ruining any of your fun over the next 15 years. So on that basis, I want to present what I think is the best we have in our crystal ball. What Richard and I have been doing this past 4 decades of life in the 80s and the 90s and the aughties and the now, what we have been doing, I think, is far from hiding the Palantir. It wasn't that we actually could see it, but we could taste it because we wanted it so much. And we were giving our lives to it. And so we were navigating upstream much more like salmon on their way to the end, smelling the water and tasting it and knowing that there was some place to get to that we absolutely had to be. Then we were like all-seeing wizards who had got some crystal ball on which everything in the universe was registered and that the Marauder's map was telling us what was going on. But after a while, you get what the wonderful geneticist Barbara McClintock called a feeling for the organism. And I think it is possible to have a feeling for the organism that is the free software movement, and to tell you what is going to happen to it that will be FSF from 30 to 45. What is happening to the free software movement is a thing that we would see from a physical chemistry point of view as phase transition. We are morphing from the first free software movement into the second. The first free software movement, the one that we all have put our time in, that Richard and I now have more than half a century of combined dedication to, the first free software movement had as an audience people who knew how software was made. It's true that the essence of the philosophy and the social insight that Richard was offering was about users' rights, as the name of everything we're doing here today and the real purpose of the copyleft demonstrates. Users' rights were the center of the thing conceptually, but the users being talked about, a very substantial portion of those users made software as well as used it. They were prosumers of software. And a very substantial portion of that very substantial portion made software that other people also used and relied upon. And so when we talked about the freedom of free software in the first phase of the free software movement, we were talking to people who could appreciate the freedom of free software as the freedom that you have to make things with your hands. That was crucially important. Those were the people we had to talk to because those were the people who made the free software. And the free software movement made a lot of free software because it understood how and it knew why it was important. And the first phase of the free software movement created also a lot of people who used free software for other purposes, which they had every right to do. And other purposes didn't mean violating the freedom of free software, but it meant violating the privacy of human beings. It meant changing the way that human beings relate to one another, mediated through a great big exoskeletal nervous system that never forgets anything, and that has way more understanding about human beings than it is wise or prudent or even just for human beings to allow to be known about themselves. And so we found ourselves at the end of the first phase of the free software movement watching as we succeeded in doing everything we meant to do, which when I used to talk about it last decade, I referred to as make freedom, put freedom in everything, turn freedom on, all of which in 3 decades of the FSF's wise stewardship we were busy doing, and we did, and we changed the way software was made all around the world. And more importantly, we changed the values of the people who made that software so that our philosophy and understanding spread itself remarkably far. But Richard, who is good at worrying, was always worried about the idea that the software would not carry the politics well. This was the essence of the problem about open source and free software, the possibility that the software could turn out to be a carrying vehicle for our ideas that wouldn't hold the ideas tightly enough as capitalism began to use the ideas in all the wonderful ways that it could think up. It might shake the philosophy loose. And of course, like most of the stuff that Richard worries about, it's a real worry, and you ought to pay attention, even if not exactly in the 24-hour-a-day fashion that Richard would want you to. And so what happened was that at the end of the first phase of the free software movement, we had both achieved pretty much the write once, run freedom everywhere idea that we were on about. And we were also busy creating in all sorts of ways that were good for creators and that produced a lot of good jobs for us and that did wonderful things. We were also creating some social some byproducts, some ecological difficulties, which we also have to deal with and which cluster around the question, what happens when you offer services to people using free software which aren't necessarily good for their freedom? When the historians look back on everything that we have done and everything that we're about to do, I think they're going to see this 30th anniversary, this today that we are spending together, as a convenient narrative point at which to talk about the inflection. In retrospect, it's not the way we're feeling this afternoon, but in retrospect, this is going to be seen as the turning point. The symbol of that turning point is Edward Snowden. Whose arrival began the process of changing the free software movement from the one we have known, which addressed itself to prosumers of software around the world, to a mass political movement that addressed the human race. What Mr. Snowden did was to put up a billboard the width of human society that explained to people who use software but who don't know how software is made why the freedom of that software could be crucial to their freedom, which was, after all, the point we have been teaching all these years. And Mr. Snowden put it up there in a way that lots and lots of other people could suddenly understand. I assume you've seen some of the polling data. It shows on the average of all the fighting and bothering about to the right of the decimal point, it shows that roughly 2/3 of the people who use the internet around the world are aware of Mr. Snowden and aware of what he says and what it means to them in some broad sense. And of that 2/3 of the internet's users, somewhere a little bit north of 1/3, roughly, plus or minus a great deal of controversy, but somewhere around 1/3 of those people are trying to do something to protect themselves and their privacy or their liberty or their freedom or whatever they think it is. So let's say that if you take all those numbers and you round them, about 1/5 of the people who use the internet in the world are aware that they have freedom issues and they want something that they can do about it. The way I might put that is 1/5 of the net's users in the world are looking for Morpheus, and we had better show up. The second phase of the free software movement is the phase at which we begin to address that broad swath of humanity that wants our message now. It's looking for us now. You can feel it trying to find us in the popular culture for the first time. Y'all seen Mr. Robot, this television program? You see how it is. We're beginning to be the people who are not quite cool enough to get the girl yet. But we exist. The sensibility that is us exists, and people are beginning to see it as a position in the culture which has to be there. Because on the other side is some faceless machine entity which is commoditizing human personality and selling stuff over it. And what Mr. Snowden told people is power cannot be trusted. And it has way more access to you than you will ever know. And what people know already is barely the beginning of enough. So we are going to be able, or at least we are going to be invited to be able, to address a scale of humanity that has never been available to us before. And if we are doing that in part using software, then that software is now welded to our message in a way that cannot be pulled apart. In phase one of the free software movement, we had to disambiguate free, but it wasn't very hard. Because we said to people, it's not free as in beer, it's free as in freedom. And the people we were talking to got it completely. That's you and me and us. And you see, I mean, we're great, but we're not the mass of the human race. In phase two of the free software movement, we are talking to people, individual people, users of what they now understand is a vast structure of digital technology that is using them. They understand that they are now the product, not the stuff. But they don't know what to do about it, and they would like to know. A lot of them are actively looking for Morpheus, and we need a red pill. The good news is we have it. It's free software. What we're going to say in phase two of the free software movement is this software is free software. Free as in protects your freedom. Because we are now talking to a you, a person, an individual, a mass of people out there who want their freedom and who are afraid it is leaking away from them into a technology that they need, they depend upon, has become constitutive of the way they identify and manage their identity in society, but which they know isn't good for them. And we have a generation coming. If you savor public opinion data, which probably you don't, but if you savor public opinion data, you know that the reading that you love tails off early because tweens and teens, they have a little buying power, but not enough to be intensively studied by the machine the way slightly older people are. Still, there's some data, and it's always really interesting to look at. And if you look at the scanty data about tweens and young teens around the world, you find that in every society where you have any data at all, those people are more positive about Snowden than the rest of their society. In the United States, they do not play hero-traitor because it's a one-sided game. Elsewhere in the world, no matter how enthusiastic the adults are, they're more enthusiastic. After I published the Snowden lectures in The Guardian, I got a note from a guy who said, my daughter's in the 8th grade, and there was an 8th grade essay contest, and all the kids in the class had to write about a hero. And 3 kids wrote about Snowden, and no other person was written about more than once. And I thought about writing to him to ask, which progressive Jewish day school does your daughter attend? And then I thought to myself, but if in fact it was a majority Chicano high school in San Antonio, it wouldn't be any different. Now I joke sometimes, not the least with Laura Poitras and some other involved people, that one of the reasons that this data looks like this around the world from the tweens and young teens is that Edward Snowden bears an uncanny resemblance to Harry Potter. But what you need to understand in a way isn't just that Laura Poitras made the greatest Harry Potter movie that has ever been made, but also that that's in itself just another sign of the way legendary has come around this, the way in which the culture has already come to reflect the idea that the hidden dark powers are ones against which we need the defense of a magic which must be our own. And so when I say a fifth of the human race is looking for Morpheus, nobody is surprised I say, except Richard, who didn't know what I was talking about. And when I say we need a red pill, I mean we need a red pill. Because we need to give people the choice. Because as Dan Geer, one of us in every way, except that he happens to work on the security side of our spectrum, as Dan says in a wonderful talk, this is the last generation in which the human race gets a choice. Now, what is about to happen to us is that these people, these young people who have a very strong set in mind already, are about to grow up and enter into the period in which they begin rebelliously to express themselves by taking on attributes that they believe will help them to deal with what is wrong in the world. Everybody does that. And there are a whole bunch of them looking for us, and they will be here soon. And we need to have technology and ideology and political organization for them. In 2004, talking in Berlin in a talk called Die Gedanken sind frei, I said that we were just keeping dinner warm until the kids came home. And I always thought, since this all started, that it was particularly appropriate that GNU turned 30 about 62 days before Snowden turned 30, because he was the first of our kids coming home. But the big bunch is about to arrive. We are about not only to become the people who are answering the question, what do I do about every bit that worries me? We are also the people who are about to experience a flood of young people coming towards us, pre-selecting us as one of the important movements they're going to attach to in their lives, and that they want to attach to in a way which is comprehensive, which is about their technology and also about what they think and say and do. Now, for this reason, we have to make our technological direction very much aware that this is about software that protects your freedom. That's why I started Freedom Box and tried to keep it running even when Bedel's house burned down and all those other things happened. And there are people in this room who know just how bad I was at doing that, and just why, if they hadn't personally showed up, we'd have stayed in the shit forever. But the good news, guys, is come October 30th, we will be publicly demonstrating all of this stuff in all free bits in boxes that are all free hardware, and we will be showing people that no matter what you want to do, make an encrypted telephone call between any 2 points in the net, or arrange that the stuff you keep on your homeland that you're a little ashamed is still there doesn't get malware and junk and advertising and rat you out quite the way it used to anymore, because your router is suddenly behaving virtuously with respect to all that technology you're sort of sorry you still own. We have a lot of tricks to play, and we're going to start being able to play them. And I hope by the middle of 2016 that Freedom Box stack, that's just a Debian config package, and you can run it anywhere the universal operating system can be installed, including Android-powered dishwashers or whatever it is that you need to make freedom out of. One of the things I hope we're going to have by the middle of next year is GNU Social and Diaspora in there doing the thing that I meant us all to be able to do in the first place, which was to federate social sharing and begin to attack the evil of data mining the human race where it most lives. I really still want us to go after the dark star. I really do. This Death Star of Facebook, we really do have to do something about it, right? We've been trying to invent our way there for half a decade. This has to work. We don't have a lot of time left. Because there are a bunch of 12-year-olds looking at this and thinking, are you sure you want to do that, Dad? I don't have a feeling that this is really the way I want to live my life. And when they get there, we need to be standing there with the blue pill and the red pill. And we need to say, okay, it's up to you. Whatever you want. That's very important. We have to do that. So we're going to do that. If you want to understand how we get from 30 to 35, it better be a lot about that. That means taking replicant in. That means making the thing that Richard dubbed ganuplicant when I finally got him to understand why. What you do is you have a free thing and then you add some stuff to it that plays some good games for people. What you do is you take the mobile operating system and you start re-engineering it now that you've got all the unfree stuff out of it, so it does a lot of extras that it really should do in the first place. But why would an advertising company sell it that way? Or anybody else for that matter. And you need a thing that inhabits all those midpoints in the net and that makes appliances that can do the kinds of stuff you want to do. And that's what the Freedom Box stack is for. And then we need to start thinking about how to invert the cloud, how to help people process it away and store it at home, and how to help people make all kinds of sharing that works for them out of storage that can be clustered anywhere where electrons are cheap. I'm still planning Iceland as the great site of one of our climactic moments in the movie of how we're going to bring freedom to the human race. Like some James Bond movie or other, it will have a little interlude in Iceland, where electrons are very cheap indeed. And what we're going to be doing in that technological direction is saying, yeah, we spent a lot of time building all this stuff. And it doesn't have bit rot, it has freedom in it, and it just keeps growing more and more about protects your freedom better and better, because somebody has to be on your side. And we are the people who are on your side, and you're the people who are on our side, and we're all in it together. That's our pitch. But we also have to keep the network neutral, as they say, which means we have to be able to offer services to one another without anybody discriminating, or the hope of offering free services to one another in human, respectful ways will be cut off by business deals among network operators, and we have to press real hard on that. In other words, we do have a politics. It is the politics of we make free software that protects your freedom. And just as the patent war winds down and all the other stuff that we've been working on gets better, that gets worse and we have to go after it. Which is why there is a lot of regulatory and government relations agenda in our next 15 years too. Within our next 15 years, an experiment is going to be conducted on a third of the human race. North of the Himalaya mountains, there is an autocracy which is planning to continue despotism forever. The rule of a single party of the few over a very large society of more than 1.3 billion people. And it wants to use the net and all the technology of digital development to enforce that on its fifth or sixth of the human race. South of the Himalayas, Narendra Modi intends to be Prime Minister of India for life, and he may do that in a Chinese way, or he may do that in a way which turns out to be about a digital India that understands that it's a democracy and that it believes in equal human dignity for all. On the outcome of that experiment on those two sides of the Himalayas depends not only the fate of the third of the human race, but of the other 2/3 too, because if everything turned out to be about the power of national digital sovereignty to keep people in slavery, then the freedom of the human race as a whole would be endangered. And what Mr. Snowden came to tell us is you could not be sure of the United States under those circumstances either, and we have to listen. So we have an enormous challenge, which cannot be met by thinking of the Free Software Foundation or the Free Software Movement as a thing in a country. It isn't a thing in a country. We're building an exoskeletal nervous system that embraces the entire human race and turns us into a single social collective of a kind, which is either very, very good for humanity or very, very bad. But it is good or bad for the whole of humanity. It isn't going to be severed up at national boundaries. We are the global free software movement from 30 to 45, and we have to learn our globalism. We have to speak Chinese. We have to write Korean. We have to understand how to build our bridges to the Islamic world that we have so far completely failed to build. We have a lot of stuff to do about all that. And we have a scaling up to do because millions of young people are coming towards us, and we have to have a home in which all of them will feel welcome, whoever they are. Unless, of course, we don't want to take the phone call. But we're the free software movement. How could we fail to take the phone call from a significant portion of humanity that wants to use software to get more freedom? That's why we exist. This is what we have to do. So we have technical opportunities and we have political opportunities, and they are very, very large indeed, and it would be very dangerous for us not to show up. And the nice part is we really are ready. We did 30 years of absolutely wonderful work. We became a technical and legal powerhouse around the world. The Free Software Foundation has outsized respect. For good reason. It earned it. Now we have to figure out how to turn outsized respect into the global mass movement that is seeking our leadership, right? We have to show up for that. It isn't easy. I've spent a lot of time recently, not so surprisingly in the last few years, thinking about what happens sociologically when small political movements get an opportunity to move into the mainstream of social, cultural, and political life. It's a rough ride. It's not a simple business like winning the lottery. Ooh, that's not so simple either. Human beings and human societies respond in understandable but unfortunately neither rational nor perfectly correlated ways towards that kind of demand for scale in success. The adherence to old ways and habits and commitments and metaphors and ways of thinking about things is adaptive right up until the moment when disruptive growth is what is necessary. And the flexibility for change and the agility of movement that you would expect from a small entity sometimes turns out not to be there. We're going to face the beauties as well as the terrors of immense success. And from 30 to 45, we're going to be dealing with the demand for change within ourselves, generated both by a lot of immigrants, which can be very stressful and often elicits really remarkably bad behavior from human communities when loads of strangers who really actually want to live and work and do and help and be part of everything and who have wonderful motives and extraordinary strength of personality turn up. Sometimes communities behave really badly about that. They fail to recognize that they should be happy about it and delighted and that it's really great, and sometimes they behave with extraordinarily short-sighted forms of trouble. And of course that won't happen to us. We're all really smart, good people. But a lot of new people are coming, and they're not exactly like us. They just really, really want to be part of what we have been doing all this time, and we need to be ready for them. And that does mean, of course, that we are going to be a little less geekish and a little more something else, and anything I say on that subject will immediately generate all kinds of doubt and uncertainty, but it's fine. We'll just go and do it. We'll just go and do it. We've had this happen to us at a technical level before, right? You know, there are projects that had 2 or 3 people in them, and now there's a lot more than that. And I'm sure there's people who have recently arrived at OpenStack and who are wondering, is this really my club after all? How come they're so bad to immigrants around here? I'm not going to put you on the spot. We are going to have a terrific next 15 years. We really will not be able to fit in any room this size on the 45th. not by time zones, if we do it right. And if we do it wrong, I will feel less happy to be here with you on the 45th anniversary than I am to be happy with you here on the 30th, because we will have screwed up big time. All those people out there. They have reason to worry. They have reason to be concerned. The more we know in this room, the more we sympathize with them. The more we understand exactly how much they're up the creek if they go on in that world of theirs with that iPad and that iPhone and that this and cloud that and oh my God. Because we understand what happens when you have a lot of data and you start crunching it and you have lots of packets and a tag cloud the size of Jupiter, and it's messy. Freedom can get really badly hurt. And if you live under the rule of the Chinese Communist Party or President Erdogan or any number of other possible places, you could get real concerned about the incidence of the public force. So we need to answer. We need to be there. We're going to be growing by leaps and bounds, and I hope we're going to be politically immensely powerful when we get together at 45. And if by any chance I'm not here or Richard is not here when we get to 45, which could happen, it won't matter anymore. It won't matter anymore, because humanity's about to be where we work, and it's a big place, and there's lots of good people in it. And let's just make sure we let them in. Thank you very much. You want to take that and give it to people, or how do we work this? We're small. If it weren't for the recording, we'd probably just speak in normal tones. Why don't I repeat in the mic what people say?
I think that'll make sense. We're going to do some questions here for a little bit. But yes. Maria?
How would the political part of our movement, just thinking of the problems within the United States because I understand them better, deal with the broadband monopolies and the cell phone monopolies?
Well,
and their government influence.
So one of the questions that you're asking, I think, if you ask what are we going to do about these oligopolists who sell bandwidth to people, one of the things that we're going to do is find that we and Larry Lessig have come back together again a little bit down the road, right? Because what you really asked about is, isn't the politics everywhere unclean because bandwidth industries generate a lot of money and politics gets paid off one way or another? And of course, that's true. That's part of how Larry got the thought way that took him where it took him. Another thing that's going to happen is that a little box and all free bits, all free hardware, quad-core little QB truck sitting on top of a pole somewhere can provide VoIP to a village through GSM handsets. That would be a thing that actually I'm ready to do as soon as I get Open BTS into the Freedom Box that is that QB truck up there on that pole and that uses Mumble to provide really nice VoIP to people in a nicely encrypted way. So at the village level, suddenly I'm a telephone company and all I have is a little $40 object on a pole. Now I add a WiMAX dongle to that and suddenly I'm an intervillage telephone company. And now I'm beginning to take the various forms of mesh that we have talked about, and I'm sort of losing the ones that we love but that never quite work for us, and I'm adding other ones that have, lots of free hardware because people have already given up on them. I spent a little time last weekend in Los Angeles trying to help a bunch of university researchers who have one of the possible IP replacements, that's name data networking, keep GPL3 in their core protocol stacks, even as the telecommunications oligopolists of the world circle around and sniff and wonder whether this is the 5G they know they have to have but don't know what it is yet. So I guess what I'm telling you is I think we're going to have some last mile disruption at the bottom from the stuff that we want to do. and the core of how they keep their ceaseless so-called inventing going, 4G to 5G. Now tell me what 5G is. Oh, we don't know, but let's all club up together, the Chinese and the Europeans, and screw the Americans and all those usual power games, which is where we've made a lot of our running over the past 30 years, right? We're not powerful, we're not rich. We just have really terrific intelligence service, and we spend a lot of time colliding other people's forces together along their fields of fracture, right? IBM and Hewlett-Packard did great against Microsoft. Google did even better, finished off Microsoft. Now we have to do something about Google. We've always been balance of power politics, people. We had to be. What we did have was some cleverness, and what we didn't have was all that money and all that power. And what we proved to people over the first 30 years was we could make a lot of capital equipment without any capital investments, at which point suddenly their money didn't look so important anymore. And we could change people's values even within an industry that had all kinds of power, which meant that even their power was limited to some extent by the power of our ideas. And so we started putting that together and using that as little bits of dynamite to collide bigger objects together when they're in motion. And that was pretty much our regulatory and legal strategy. I'm going to spend a little time this fall, not here today, but at our 30th anniversary celebration of FSF at our conference at the end of October. I'm going to spend a little time talking about how I think we did that. I think it's come to be time to go back and describe some of the old magic tricks so that if I do go under a bus, people will remember how they were performed. We're gonna make them fight one another for our benefit, okay? If you want the bottom line of this, and we're going to do that by creating technological disruptions and government relations nightmares around the world in such a way that people have to respond to things. Mr. Zuckerberg is still busy flying Indian reporters business class to California to explain what a philanthropist he is and giving bandwidth to the poor. But based on the stuff we published last week and our letter to the Prime Minister and various other stuff, I think it would be fair to say that we are beginning to have real traction there on the idea that Mr. Zuckerberg is no charity at all. He's simply buying the de-anonymized packets of the Indian poor at a pretty low price. And when we pointed out in India in August that this meant no HTTPS for poor people, and he scutters around and says, well, now I have a better man in the middle attack your HTTPS to me, poor people, and then I turn it around and give it to the other guy, but don't worry, I only keep your unencrypted data for momentarily, and so on. And last week he goes from calling it internet.org to free basics by Facebook because he suddenly realized that nonprofit law is going to cause him a little bit of a problem if he keeps on pretending this is charity. So, you know, we use our elbows a little bit, and we try and joggle some of the pieces in such a way that something might fall into the pocket on our side of the table. It's what we always do. It's not very elegant, but it works. Yeah, Deb.
I think we did a really good job of explaining why we need to accommodate the incoming masses when they get here. And I would go so far as to say not just accommodating, but absorbing. Because for myself, I don't have any teenagers, so I don't really know what the kids are up to. But that's when they come, we should allow them to help us with those things that we're not good at. I would just like to see more of that because I want to make sure that we're not putting you have to go watch Twilight and be cool and stick vampires on your website and learn about fonts and do all these things if you don't want to. What you do have to do is let someone else in who does want to. So I don't know if you've been seeing great examples.
Well, if I were to say that you had to be one of those young people to care about fonts, then Dave Crosland would murder me the next time I see him. So I'm not going to say that. I, too, care about typography a whole hell of a lot. I'm just an awfully old-fashioned LaTeX-using kind of a guy. The good news is you're absolutely right, and the bad news is it's much harder than you think because when a whole lot of people are coming at you, it's not about you absorbing them, it's about them absorbing you. And that makes people nervous, you see. That's when it gets nervous-making, right? That's when the stuff you didn't know was in us begins to come out because we don't want to be absorbed. We want to do the absorbing, right? It's all very fine having a baby boom when they're babies, okay? But when they grow up and they want to be the voters and suddenly it turns out there's more of them than it is of you, then it gets harder. So what's really about to happen to us is that we have to do two things. We have to continue to be about the purity we care about, and we have to begin to be about the effectiveness they're going to demand, because the reason they're coming to us is because they want something. They will take the idea happily with the something that they want because the idea is part of what they want. But we have to be there to be effective for them. This is why I don't want Freedom Box not running on Raspberry Pi. Every time I say Raspberry Pi, I can hear Richard already shouting, and I start covering my ear, and that's okay. That's his job. But my job is to say, listen, if there's a $30 thing out there that somebody who wanted $30 privacy and security for their communications could buy, and they wanted to do that, I want it to work. Well, and part of the beauty of this is that the ARM9 world has so many nice things for us in it, where all the bits and all the blots are free, that we are going to be able to say, you know, that Pi actually, you could do better for less and it would still be even freer than that. So we're going to have nice competition in our hardware world. But I really do want runs on Android-powered coffee pots, not because I like Android-powered coffee pots. I can't imagine why I want one even. But if you're a person in a Chinese city and you have an Android-powered coffee pot and you would like secure communications to the world regardless of how they feel about VPN providers today, I want it to work. I want it to work. It's really important that it work, because what we're promising people is, yeah, we knew you were coming, okay, we got it. We had your back. That's where our political power comes from. Our political power doesn't come from the fact that there are more of us or that we're older or smarter or anything like that. Our political power in that bigger movement in which we are going to be absorbed is going to come from the fact that we're the people who had your back before you knew that you needed us. We were there for you. That's where political credibility comes from. Political credibility is currently generated by a phony thing called authenticity, right? Which consists of, I can pretend I used to have your back, and if you elect me, I will still. Even though you know I'm not really telling you the truth, at least I'm doing a better imitation than she is. We want to deliver the actual, right? We really had your back. Richard Stallman really was right. And we joined up with him, and we did all this for generations before you were a glint in your parents' eye. And now we have your back. That's where our political power is going to come from. Yeah.
So I'm part of the people in this room that has kids. I have 4 of them, age 3, 6, 9, and 12. And at 12 years old, my girl understands a lot of the things we're discussing here today. She knows why she doesn't have an iPad that all her friends have, but she still wants one,
Yeah.
right? So I think it's very powerful how you say this is probably the last opportunity. Well, I feel like it's the last opportunity I have to give her that deal. Her brothers and sisters will probably just follow with that, and I think they have a better opportunity because I'm nearby, and I would encourage anyone else that doesn't have kids, probably because I'm taking care of mine first and then trying to have some impact at their schools, with the committees, within the school boards, within the political instances that I have available as a parent. But if you know other people that have kids, I didn't think it was the case, but currently I'm practically leaving all of my free software advocacy work in Quebec completely to just join the educational advocacy part of that system. And the impact, and I'm not talking about myself, but the impact of people actually understanding and discovering this is just, to me, it's just amazing. I didn't realize so much information was just missing. It wasn't being ignored by the teachers chance that we cannot miss, but I didn't feel the urgency.
Those are the people. Those are the people we need to be best at reaching. I'm watching DKG sitting there and feeling the runner's tension or the cyclist tension in him as we do this. Those of us who are working in that part of the educational system are the people we need to listen to most carefully, which is why every time I wish that he was hacking on Freedom Box twice as fast and twice as wonderful as he did, I have this feeling on the other side. The mayor of New York City says he's going to get CS instruction to every child in the New York City public schools in the next 10 years. If you believe him, that could be a disaster. It could be really, really terrible. When Joel Klein, the former chancellor of the New York City Public Schools, signs up with Rupert Murdoch to do the proprietary education, monitoring every child every moment through every iPad in every hand, we are meeting the enemy, and it is not us. Okay, but we have to do the not usness of that very, very well, right? It's why I do all the edX support I can, and why compromise is the nature of this. Okay, please keep this in mind. Purity is very hard in this world. If you allow yourself to get excluded, the door is shut and you are gone. And on the other hand, my nephew went off to college a few weeks ago, and I gave him as a graduation present one of our de-chromed Chromebooks with a bunch of free bits in it, and I said, here, it's a great computer, and it's so cheap that if it gets broken, we don't have to care. It's disposable computing, but go. And he shows up in Waterville, Maine, and starts his life at Colby College, and he's within hours, he's the kid who runs free software, you see. Everybody knows it's extremely cool. They know they don't know how to do it. There's a kid who does know how to do it. Suddenly he's something, and I think he's staggering under this unwanted identity that I wished on him with a graduation present he's not fully sure he shouldn't get rid of, but at least he has a place to make tech support calls, and the wireless works. The reach we have to reach down there should feel like fun to us, because you're right, they're not our kids. It's easier than to do other people's dishes, but we do have to go and do it. We have to go and do it. We can assume that Coca-Cola and FIFA are the people who have to market to these young people, and that it's all about football and soda, but the truth is we really have to do this very, very well. We need to learn from the people who are in touch, and we need to say to them, what do you need? What do you want? What can we do for you? How can this be made better for you? And I'm hopeful, right? Okay, I'm hopeful that we'll show up for you. But you've asked for exactly the right thing, and it must happen exactly that way.
You make a distinction between Amazon Web Services and Google Cloud Services. Google is getting into the space, becoming extended. I'm wondering what your opinion is for freedom.
What I would say about this is that you could try and measure this for us, or you could just try and measure what is scaring everybody else in the industry. Amazon Web Services has a franchise which is very strong and very important, and everybody understands it. But it's not why the executives and CEOs in the enterprise world I deal with are running scared. They're running scared of the Google Cloud. And they're running scared of the Google Cloud because that is eating their customer base in their real experience too fast, and they don't know what to do about it. We know what to do about it. We do actually know what to do about it. And what we say in those conversations is, that's right, that's why you must become hybrid cloud builders. Because your future is in offering companies a way that they can avoid losing their entire destiny by putting all their stuff in somebody else's something. Of course they're going to buy utility computing from Google. Of course they're going to buy utility computing from AWS. They are indeed. They're not buying it because it's cheaper. They know perfectly well that the cloud they're buying is not cheaper than they can build it themselves. The Microsoft cloud is a unique thing because it is made by breaking Windows Server and forcing people to use it who are already Microsoft customers. And that's where the growth curve that's supposed to feed the Microsoft cloud comes from. It's from breaking shit and saying, now you have to use Office 365. Well, no, man, I'll give you a real technical example, okay? So everybody who has enterprise email has got a security checklist made in the last few years that says two-factor authentication, yes, no. If no, go directly to the office of the general counsel and the CEO to be whacked for it, right? So you have Exchange Server and you have to provide two-factor authentication or else. And so you buy from Phone Factor, if you're in the US about 80% of the time, you buy from Phone Factor the stupid, we SMS you a second factor and then you use it deal. So Microsoft buys Phone Factor. They suppress the service. They tell everybody, oh, we're sorry, for technical reasons, two-factor authentication is no longer available if you run Exchange Server on your own hardware. But for similarly undescribed technical reasons, you can get it back if you move to the Office 365 cloud. Bump. Now you had a winning quarter, okay? This is Satya Nadella's business at the moment. He has to get to a better business, and he's trying. And oddly enough, he knows he can't do that without free software in its open source commercial form. That's part of why the patent war is ending. You notice that Microsoft and Google gave up on all patent trouble with one another this week, total exchange of releases. Peace is breaking out, okay? And now it is the moment for us to roam around and get our diplomacy done quickly because peace is breaking out. And Keith Burgelt and I have to spend a lot of time thinking about how to win the peace, which is breaking out, before some other people go and win it for us, all right? But if you leave the Microsoft cloud out of it, which has, as usual, unique bad features are connected with it, everybody else is basically selling businesses not cheaper utility computing, but quite expensive utility computing, which allows you to get rid of IT employees. What is really happening here is you don't have to pay for the throats you choke anymore. Utility computing allows you to choke but Google doesn't have a throat, or we could show you the throat, but then we'd have to kill you, or it's in some secret place, right? And that's why, although these guys are all freaking out and the execs are having a very morose year, in the long run, it's going to balance back again. Because although people want to get rid of their IT staff, and they really are, I mean, it is the revenge against the revenge of the nerds right now, right? They all need to spin up 10,000 VMs an hour, or at least they think they do. And if they have to spin them up in a spinning factory in which they have to pay geeks like us a lot of money, or like you anyway, a lot of money to make this work, they would just as soon buy it from Google at about a time and a half what it's worth and fire the people. So we're going through one of those capitalist moments where productivity goes up and employment goes down and jobs move to places where Google went for cheap hydropower or whatever it was they did. And then a little bit later in the cycle, the CIOs and the CEOs and the board realize that they've been giving up control over their destiny, and they try and get some of it back. By that time, the really smart guys, whether it is the really smart Larry Ellison, who's actually really smart compared to the really smart Donald Trump, or the really smart IBM institutional thinkers, they've all realized that they are now in the data marketing business. And they've begun doing that, and their analytics and their really smart data brokerage is how they get over this next phase in the history of the industry. And as you see, the IBM guys are now willing to announce their fundamental semiconductor innovations because Martin Fink announced his and then took them back a little bit. And so everybody is beginning to announce all the stuff about next technology computing, which we know is coming and which has a very important effect on us as free software makers. Oh, but that would be another talk.
Any more questions? What is your opinion of companies like Apple pushing BSD style software to try to replace
Look, one of the things that we need to understand is that we have to do two things in order to keep our existing technology vital. We have to prevent bit rot, and we have to prevent people from becoming allergic to copyleft. I have always assumed that the social titration over copyleft, making sure that pH didn't go too high or too low, was a very important part of what we did. I am not convinced that the social structures presently deciding the pH of the water are correctly functioning. If we allow people to get more allergic to GPL of any flavor than they should, we're going to wind up stimulating more such activity. Similarly, the process of keeping GCC ahead of LLVM becomes a very difficult technical job now. It is not a proposition that can be run on the basis of Richard's revolutionary design philosophy that carried us for an entire generation. It is no longer a problem of we need to solve a nuance in copyleft so that we can do inter-process optimization in a competitive way. When we went from GPL2 to GPL3, we needed to protect GCC's technical future by making it easier to perform large-scale inter-process optimization. Richard was always very nervous about that because it would mean writing out more intermediate representation data to storage for IPO analysis, which meant that there would be room for a form of proprietary optimization it would be hard to use copyleft against. And then when we moved to GPL3, we changed the way the GCC linking exception worked, and we tried to give ourselves more room by leveraging the difficulty of rewriting all the front ends for Java and C++ and so on, which was good enough for a while. But what has really happened to us as a consequence of the Android revolution and the Java over-dependency and the just-in-time compilation problems connected with VMs like Hotspot, we have wound up in a place in which Steve Jobs really did have an opportunity to screw us from the dead, and he is doing it. Are we going to face more efforts to produce non-copyleft alternatives to important copyleft programs? Yes, we will. Ought we to be extremely careful about the diplomacy of how we operate so as to keep demand for copyleft growing in industry instead of shrinking? Yes, absolutely. Again, I repeat, that's why I'm busy worrying about things like future internet architectures, because I want to embed copyleft in places now. Do I want to encourage the occasional corporate renegade who thinks that there's not enough copyleft in the middle of OpenStack, and we really ought to think about making some OpenStack contributions under GPL3 and rocking and rolling with the bylaws of the OpenStack Foundation a little bit? Yes, I do. Are they really going to do it? No. Am I really going to try and buy them more scotch and hope they do? Yes, indeed I am. There's a lot of little bits to this, right? Are we going to wind up with SMB in the Linux kernel? Sure. I mean, from a performance point of view, why wouldn't we? That's not going to hurt us. That's going to be copyleft work. Is Samba going to turn out to be a whole lot more than it was? Yes, every single release of Samba has always turned out to be a whole lot more than it was before, and for good reason, right? Will Samba not be as important when Windows is a thing nobody on earth is running? Yes. Tell me when that will be, and we'll all have a party. Even Tridge will show up. But I don't think that the primary way to think about this is oppositionally. Part of the difficulty, and trust me, as a person who has spent his lifetime training lawyers when he wasn't working for the free software movement, I know that this problem is not our fault. Oppositional thinking is comparatively cheap and easy. Ecological thinking is a little harder, takes longer, and is less immediately rewarding, particularly if you're bloodthirsty. Trying to understand this in an ecological way is really about asking, how do we get the idea that there are copyleft cores in technology where what we really want is born free, stays free, no patent rivalry, no bullshit, everybody works together, with mid layers where there are various kinds of ecological possibilities and a lot of exploring going on. And then those largely useless commercial feud zones out there where everybody patents up the wazoo and they all go and try and eat one another's customers, about which we are generally, usually, almost as agnostic as Richard thinks we are. Richard sometimes says that Eben's job is companies and intrigue. Sometimes he uses something more morally deprecatory than intrigue, and I just sort of have to put up with it. But sometimes we are almost at the scale where Richard exists, where companies are parsecs away and we really don't care. There's a lot of the ecology of software which consists of their ceaselessly over-differentiating for no good reason, right? And most of the time when I am telling people you don't have enough copy left, I'm telling them that I'm warning you that in this corner of the product line, in this vertical, in this piece of the way we all work together, you're all going to lose a lot of money over differentiating for no good reason. I remember saying to all the industry lawyers 3 years ago, you're really going to have way too many orchestration layers and stuff like that. You really need some AGPL in the middle of OpenStack, Yeah, well, imagine if NASA had understood as clearly as we do now, right? The moment of greatest amusement to me was when a certain billionaire you all know and love said to me, we really should have just put OpenStack under AGPL3 to start with. And I thought, is that a South African diplomatic statement or what? I mean, yeah, you should have done it. It's great. But you weren't around and you didn't have the power and nobody was going to listen, and so we're going to have the mess we're going to have. People waste a lot of money on that stuff because differentiating their product seems so much more important than having really good technology for their customers. And then they wind up with an AIX over here and an HPUX over there, and they pay horribly for the experience. So if we keep our eye on the ecology of this, if we try and concentrate people's attention on why is everything in the world under the Apache license, do you really want to proprietize or even non-copy left a bunch of important stuff? Look at what the consequences will be down the road. If we're analytical about it, we have influence. People listen to us. But we have to talk the language they understand about this, and that's not the language of it's evil to do or you shouldn't use permissive licensing. It's you're going to cost yourselves a lot of money and you're going to fall in a shit puddle, and why should you do that? Anybody else? I think we're done.
Yeah, we're just a little after 5.
Okay, terrific. Thank you all.